Welcome, everybody, to episode 27 of Crossing the Line with Greg Heym. We're here in Studio 1873, tastefully decorated by our good friends at the Everset. And we're joined today by Kael Goodman, co-founder of Marketproof.
Right.
I didn't want to write an introduction, so I stole yours off the website. A real estate intelligence and analytics company that makes real estate data accessible and actionable for every player in the marketplace.
That's it.
So all you players out there, he's your guy.
Right. Thank you.
So how many years has it been since you founded Marketproof?
We started really in 2021. Our first product is called Marketproof Pro, and that really focused on new development condos.
Right.
Since then, we've broadened it out to cover resale condos, co-ops, townhouses, basically everything. But what we're still really known for is our new development stuff.
And that's the hardest data to get. And we'll talk about that in the second part of the show.
All right.
Just
all
keep
right.
people
Well,
on.
let's stick to the
But
format, right?
it's certainly, I'm glad I don't do a lot of news. We have a division for that, so I have plenty to worry about.
By Steve and Robin.
Yes. We love development marketing. We had a battle of the more network stars on Steve's podcast.
Yeah.
We had me, Vince, Melissa, and Candace, and we made fun of them for, well, maybe that was just me, but we had a good time with Steve.
All right.
Steve and I just also interviewed Vicki Bean.
How'd that go?
She was very interesting. She is the expert on affordable housing development. She was deputy mayor for housing and economic
Development,
right, in the de Blasio administration. She was also the head of HPD. She was one of the panelists. I saw you at the forum. Standing by the entrance. At
the Real Deal Forum.
At the Real Deal Forum,
Yeah.
yeah. She was a panelist, and so we talked to her about 485X, which is the new 421A, and whether or not that's actually going to lead to.
What'd you guys get to?
What do you mean?
Is it going to do anything?
Well, the benefits are very generous.
Mm-hmm.
It's the wage requirements and the affordability requirements that will trip people up.
Yeah.
No one will want to build a building with more than 149 units because that's the line where the affordability has to be really affordable and is going to squeeze margins for sellers. Plus, there's also a condo benefit, but your assessed value has to be under a certain amount, which you don't know when you apply because you haven't been
It's a little
valued
still
yet.
not quite everything that people would want.
Well, and you don't understand, like when I worked at Revenue, I always tell people, well, they pass a law and then there are the rules and regulations. And once they get to that, maybe it'll be a little more clear.
And they can make some amendments to it.
Yeah, they can.
We'll see.
Hopefully they don't wait. They went from 421A to 485X. That's a lot of law
Skipped
passed.
a lot of numbers.
They didn't skip them. They used
They're
them.
all filled up.
I hope so. Maybe they're not. If they've been filled.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Anyhow,
Yeah.
thanks for coming by.
All right.
Always wanted to do this. Glad you finally said yeah. I know. I didn't send a formal invitation until you
we'll do it
cornered
again.
me. Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll check the ratings first, Ray, and then we'll see. I'm sure they'll be great. So we start with our line items. I'm sure you read the blog every week.
Been reading it now for quite a long time.
We won't quiz you on it. We'll take your word for it because it'll break my heart, if it's not true. Now, I
do read it, of course.
the whole idea behind this, it's good to refresh our viewers and listeners' memories. It was based off the blog. Like, how can we spend more time talking? Because blog, people want to read it in 3 minutes or 5 minutes or be able to gloss over it real quick for the stuff they care about. Here, we can talk about it more, have experts on like yourself. So it's really good to have both venues. And it's really good that this is literally right outside my office, which makes
Couldn't be any closer.
If it was in my office, it could, but then I'd never get away from it. And Ray wouldn't want to spend that much time.
Yeah, but the audience needs to know now you have a standing desk.
I have a standing desk as of this morning,
Right.
yes. So, sitting's the new smoking, so they say. It's been a long time since I had a cigarette, so who knows. All right, so the first thing was we got a visit from the PI brothers, as I call them, the Consumer Price Index and the Producer Price Index. And it was one of those, oh, no, oh, wait, it's okay things, because Producer Price Index came out a day before, and producer prices or wholesale prices rose more than expected. Now, that's concerning because when the costs are more to make the product, they tend to pass it on to us consumers. But luckily, just a day later, Big Brother CPI came out, and came in a little below forecast on the month-to-month increase. Interesting enough, I never realized this because I never thought about it, I guess, in this way. Just shelter and gasoline prices alone were 70% of the increase in CPI last month.
Shelter and gasoline.
And like gas had been falling up until recently, prices, and now they've been rising. So the overall increase was 0.3%. That was a little bit better than the 0.4%. That's the headline number that includes everything. Core prices, which strip out gas and food prices because they can be very all energy prices and food prices because they can be volatile, also rose 0.3% and was 3.6% higher than a year ago. So even looking at core inflation is running higher than the headline number because housing is the biggest part of core inflation, right? And it takes longer to come down. Now, you've done a lot of research about what moves prices, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But housing prices don't move very quickly, do they? Unless there's a Lehman Brothers-esque incident.
Well, even then, the change can be pretty slow. And if we're talking about New York, it's really anomalous to the rest of the country.
Yeah,
which is something else we can definitely talk about.
Well, the difference here compared to most other places in the country is we have inventory. We have stuff to sell. They don't.
Yeah. Well, yes, but even in New York, the inventory is still way down, though there is. And when we're talking about new developments, inventory has dropped by like 40%.
Well, that's the big part of it. People think that 21 was this record year of sales. It wasn't. If you go back and look before Lehman, 2006, 2007, we were having more closings because there were so many new condos coming on the market that it was an amazing amount of supply.
Yes, but across the New York market, there's really been two big shocks: the financial crisis and then COVID. So you see these really big dips, and then they rise after that. And it's really interesting to look at how far down the dips went and how high the peaks went after that. And the 2021 peak is by far the highest, much higher than the post-financial crisis.
The only thing that came to mind, two things. In 2019, I believe it was, when they increasing mansion and transfer taxes, there was a huge amount of closings in June.
Brief. Right before the deadline.
And a couple of years before that, when the capital gains rate was changing, it was the best December ever.
Yeah.
Like it was the best month of any month that year by far, showing that tax policy does influence the real estate market greatly. So 3.6% growth in CPI. Again, it's not the measure the Fed uses, but just another reminder that we're still well above the 2% target. And look, markets were happy with this because, again, it canceled out the PPI data that had everybody scared. And the past couple of months, CPIs come in higher than forecast. But, of course, then they get ridiculous. It's slightly lower. It's 0.3 instead of 0.4. Okay, let's not spike a football yet. But now banks, a lot of large banks are doubling down, and they're like, see, there are going to be rate cuts this year because they don't listen to this podcast. They know there aren't going to be any. And J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs actually are looking for Fed cuts as early as July. And as I said in the blog, good luck with that.
Right.
What is going to change? It's already almost the end of May.
Right.
What do they think? Monthly data is volatile. Anything can happen to you. Still if we were at 2.5%, you'd say, well, maybe. Plus, does the economy need rate cuts?
Right.
GDP is still growing. I mean, the number in the first quarter was weak, but that's one quarter.
So just looking back at what you said in the top of the show about the divergence in these two metrics, what do you see happening there? What's going on with that? Is it data gathering, or is there something real there?
Well, the problem is I used to work for the BLS many years ago, and they're samples, and samples need to be changed. Data is re-benchmarked every year. And when I issue my reports, we revise all the prior data because stuff always comes in late and you correct things. And that's why we joke that, we have the PI brothers, but then we have the cooler cousin, which is a core PCE index, which is a more complete picture. That's why it comes out later.
What is that one? PCE is?
Personal Consumption Expenditures Index.
Okay, let's dig in. Can we dig into that one for a second?
Well, there's no...
What's in it?
Well, the difference is, you may have heard this analogy, with consumer prices, if the price of steak goes up people might buy more chicken. They're not going to buy as much steak. CPI doesn't really account for that to the same level. Plus, we joked when we did an analysis probably 2 months or so ago that they ask people like how much of your income your money is spent on housing, alcohol, and what they found out was that consumer price index was underweighting alcohol compared to what people are actually spending on it, because the personal consumption expenditures price index,
Right.
that's based on actual spending. They actually have the number. It's a more complete number. CPI gets all the love in the media because it comes out before
First.
PCE. And then by the time PCE comes out, people are just waiting for the jobs report, which usually comes out the next week. So, but the Fed looks at the core PCE index, which isn't rising as much as the CPI, but is still well above 2%. So don't expect any change in the Fed policy. They're going to wait. They're not going to do anything. There's no reason to do it. We're not in a recession. It doesn't look like one's imminent right now. We still have a really hot labor market. The unemployment rate's been under 4% since February of 22. So that shows you that, people talking about stagflation because we saw in the GDP report, economic growth was slowing, inflation was rising, but you need an elevated unemployment rate to have stagflation. We don't have that. When you're sitting at 3.9%, unemployment's not a problem at all. Okay. There's still also 8.4 million available jobs out there. So we got that going for us, which is nice. So the other thing, and another thing we always tell people, and everything we can agree on this, tell your buyers that are saying, when is the Fed going to lower mortgage rates, remind them the Fed doesn't control mortgage rates. Lower rates, yeah. Did I say?
Right. It's disconnected.
They could move in complete opposite directions, as they did when the Fed started hiking rates, and we had what we call an inverted yield curve. But that's a more boring discussion for another podcast. So remind people, the Fed hasn't touched rates since July. Mortgage rates move all the time. Go look at a chart. They fell sharply at the end of last year, and then they've been trending up this year, although we've had 2 straight weeks of rate declines. So that's worth celebrating. And we're going to talk about the impact that has on housing here in Manhattan in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
The other thing that came out this week was retail sales. Retail sales is also trumped by the personal consumption expenditures because it has price data and also has data on actual spending. So it's a much more thorough look at it. But retail sales were flat, unchanged in April. It was worse than expected. Economists were looking for a 0.4% increase. The biggest increase in sales last month, and this is because the price of gasoline went up so much, was gas stations, which saw a 3.1% jump in sales in just 1 month. Non-store retailers, or as the rest of the world calls them, internet sales, posted the biggest decline. I guess people were taking an Amazon break or something like that. I don't know. They were down 1.2% from March. Over the past year, retail sales, which aren't adjusted for inflation, are up 3%. So when you adjust that for inflation. See, that's how old I am.
It's early on a Monday morning, everybody.
It's not early for me, but maybe I'm not getting enough sleep. Inflation. We're going to have to do a blooper reel. But Ray's going to say, Greg, you don't make enough mistakes for a blooper reel. I'll work on it. So sales are up 3% year over year. We mentioned the headline CPI number is up 3.4%. So actually, consumers continue to get less for their money. They're spending more and they're getting less for it. So, since you look at these 2 reports, we have slightly lower inflation, we have declining sales. That seems to show a cooling economy. And why won't the Fed jump and start cutting rates to get this economy going? It's just 1 month, and they're not going to think about anything until the PCE numbers come out, and that's on the 31st. So mark your calendar.
31st of May.
Yeah, it's always right at the end of the month. So that were the line items. We're going to get to some more in detail analysis with Kael and a great new study he's put out. But first, we're going to take a break for this very important message.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business. And it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. you need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
And we're back here with Kael Goodman, my good friend.
That's right.
So you've had a recent post about how mortgage rates influence Manhattan's real estate market.
Yeah.
And look, we know how it influences markets in general. Typically, when rates are going up, you would expect at some point to see a decline in sales as affordability goes down. And when rates are lower, although typically when you first see lower rates, it's because the economy isn't doing very well. So there's a lag period, I assume, but that helps everybody. But here in Manhattan, where the vast majority of owned real estate are apartments, co-ops, and condos, there's a big difference necessarily between the way they react to higher and lower rates. So let me talk about that.
Right. Well, the first thing is just to understand that in Manhattan right now, around 70% of sales are all cash. You compare that to the rest of the United States. Now, I don't do this data myself, but what I see from the Redfin data is that in the United States as a whole, top 40 markets, cash sales are 35% of sales. Yeah. So not only are sales in Manhattan substantially more expensive, but people buy with cash.
And there's a number of reasons for that. Most notably, there's a lot of cash here. It's like the $33.8 billion in cash bonuses that Wall Street paid out last year. But also co-ops require a lot more cash.
Co-ops will require cash, and one of the things we've been looking at is whether or not cash sales for co-ops is greater than for condos. And it's pretty interesting. I mean, really the driver is that co-ops are the value play. So, in Manhattan, we track 3 separate asset classes. The first one is new developments. So that's a sponsor selling units that have never been sold before.
Which are overwhelmingly condo.
Right. It's got to be, those are like 90-something% condos at this point. There's very few co-ops that have been built in the last 50, 60 years.
And a lot of those have been condops, which is a technical term that we won't dig into.
But before that, it was all co-ops. And the quantity of co-ops that were built still far outnumbers the number of condos.
Yeah, it's like a 65-35 roughly.
Right. And there are hundreds of thousands of co-op units in New York, and they are very stable. Partly for the reason you said, they're all cash. People own them for a long time. But at this point, those co-ops are really the value play. So you have new developments, which are the premium. Right, they get a big premium over condos. We track that week to week, and sometimes it's 30, 40, 50% premium that new development condos are getting over resale condos. And then resale condos get a big premium over co-ops, another 20 to 30%.
And that accounts for, I did a study on this many years ago at Rebney. And it's hard because if you have 2 identical apartments, one's a co-op, which doesn't happen because co-ops tend to be virtually all pre-war co-ops,
older,
and condos tend to be virtually all post-war
yep.
In most areas. But there's 2 main reasons. Co-ops have an underlying mortgage, right? And co-ops have rules. Now, this is more of a big deal in Manhattan than other boroughs, but they can tell you, I don't care what the bank says, they may give you a 20% down payment mortgage. You're going to have to put 50, 60, or 100% cash when you buy. They have subletting rules. They have work rules. So between those 2 things, which, appeal to some buyers and don't to others, you have roughly a 20% discount on the co-op if everything else is the same.
Right, apples to apples.
Right.
But what we're seeing right now is that the rise in rates decreases the overall volume of transactions, and it's down a lot.
Right. Trust me, we noticed.
Right. And then separately, as rates increase and affordability becomes a factor, there's a small percentage of buyers that'll shift from condos to co-ops.
Right.
And so right now, kind of what's happening is that the percentage that co-ops represent has increased a bit. Not that much because there's so much all cash.
Right.
But it has ticked up. And so there is a little bit of substitution. I think that's an economic term that you would use, right?
Well, people other than
chicken
economists
for
chicken for steak, co-op for condo.
Yep.
No, I think people. In some ways, it's not that much different from buying a home. Like you may say, I want a garage, a detached garage. I want a furnished basement. I want a bonus room, something that they don't use here in New York, but every other show you see them using. And then they go, well, you can't get that for the money. Okay, I'll take the ranch on the slab, without a basement or a garage, because that's the play that makes the most sense for me. And I think people see that with co-ops and condos. Look, it's like townhouses. Some people love townhouses because they want multi-floor living. But there's also a whole bunch of issues that come along with townhouses that don't come along with co-ops and condos.
Yeah, and we're seeing that play out as well, because the desirability of townhouses has actually decreased.
Because it used to be the only way you could get that much square footage, right?
But now the condo units have gotten much bigger with more amenities, and you can get townhouse-style living in a condo.
Yeah, I mean, and you could put. It's like my brother lives in Texas. He has this ridiculous size ranch.
Right, 6,000.
Well, it's not that big. Not like a ranch house. So you don't know what's going on at the other end of the house.
Sure.
You get tired walking from one end to another.
Yeah.
It's sometimes I'll spend a couple of days there. I don't even get to part of the house. It's so big.
Right.
They have rooms for everything over there. So when you're in a situation like this, when rates are increasing, it will bring more people to co-ops. And even though it's like 65-35 in the total stock, usually it runs close to 50-50, maybe 55-45 condo because of all the new product. Right?
Well, it brings more people to co-ops, and it also stabilizes the price of co-ops, which is something we've been seeing, is that the resale condo prices have declined a little bit, while the co-op prices have been stable.
Well, they may be stable, but a lot of people will ask, especially for the older estate condition or unrenovated, you're looking at values from maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, depending on the condition and the location. So that's another concern. These co-ops don't have the amenities, too, that condos do, particularly the newer ones.
Right. So, this is a thing that, that is really at play right now, which is, the co-ops are really starting to age.
Right.
And if you had Orest on your show, Orest Tomaselli, he would talk about reserve studies and the amount of cash that these buildings need to be holding as they really get older. Plus, we talked a little bit about local laws.
The two scariest words in New York City.
Local laws. Law. We have the energy stuff coming up.
And they just came out. They said that we need to hire more people for this.
For the enforcement?
Yeah. Yeah. It's scary. But look, co-ops do have an appeal for people who want to know who their neighbors are. They don't necessarily want a lot of subletting in the building. There's a lot of cash, that's required, and your financial statements have to be looked at. So you feel a little more comfortable, right?
And let me give you just a little bit different angle on that, which is that in many ways, New York has felt a little choppy these days, right? We got quality of life issues going on. We can talk about that more if you want to. But
we got better sports teams.
We do. We've been doing really well. But because
sorry, Knicks. What are you going to do? The team shoots like 70% for all.
Yeah, but they had it was an amazing.
Plus, they're
series.
all injured.
Injured, and the other team played so well. But so anyway, because of the way co-ops are structured, it has created stability as a base for residential real estate in Manhattan that other cities don't have.
Right.
And so that creates an environment where New York, despite our current challenges, is really still viewed as a stable real estate market.
And for those of you who aren't as familiar with the New York market, co-ops this isn't the only place, but it's one of a few places that have co-ops. Yeah. Kind of like rent stabilization. We have rent stabilization. Most other places don't have it. But basically, you don't technically own real property.
Maybe we should explain what the difference is, shouldn't
we?
Right.
So with a co-op, with a condo, it's like owning, a house. You own a parcel of real property. It has its own unique tax ID. You pay the taxes, right? With a condo, you do have to pay common charges because there's parts of the building, elevators, lobbies, and you have to pay your share for that. But you get your own tax bill. You own the unit. You can pretty much do what you want with it. With some exceptions. But yeah, there are some quirks, and that's why offering plans, which tend to be 300 to 500 pages, and then there's all these amendments, are confusing. With a co-op, you don't own real estate. You own shares in a corporation that owns the building. So, you are then you're forced to abide by the rules of the co-op about subletting and how much cash you have to buy, and they have to approve your buyers. not all co-ops are that strict, but clearly the more expensive
But
ones.
generally stricter than condos.
100%. And then there's this thing called a condop, which you're still buying a co-op unit, but it's a legal term for a building where the lot has been condoed. When you condo a lot, you're just carving it up into other lots. Most people associate that only with apartments, but one of those lots could be a co-op building, one could be a commercial, or one could be a rental. There's even cases like that. So hopefully I've explained
And
that.
so the lower price of the co-op is because
Of those things that the differences and the underlying mortgage,
right, and
that
less
they all carry.
liquidity in your transactions.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's weird because you don't pay mortgage recording tax, so that's helpful.
That's a plus.
Yeah, and for the longest time here in New York City, co-op sales didn't become public until I think it was August of 2004. So it was the most commonly form of ownership, most common form of ownership here in Manhattan, and in certain parts of other boroughs as well. And there was no place to look up prices. You had
That's
to
right.
rely on the brokers to give you the information. And we still don't have an MLS like we do in other parts
so
of the country. Here.
if I could, today, just around 50% of sales in Manhattan are co-ops, and it's pretty, relatively stable around that number. And one of the things that we've been working on at Marketproof is, we talked a little bit about how the co-op units are older. So that means a lot of the information around them predates the internet, predates Acris, but there is still lots of information that has been created over time, and we've been using AI to grab that information out of the oldest data to make those co-ops more visible.
So let's talk about that. We'll segue into what I think most people think of when they think of Marketproof, and that's tracking those new developments. And I know you put out data on contract signings and all that stuff. So in the old days, well, now at least you can get offering plans sort of online. The Attorney General's site has the newer ones. It seems they're not going back.
They're filling them in, and Rebney, thankfully, has stepped up to also require that the Schedule A, which is a part of the offering plan, is now uploaded to the Rebney website.
And the Schedule A is basically the list of the units and the prices.
Yeah, the percentage ownership,
the expected taxes,
right, all that stuff, just the financial part of it. But the offering plan information has been around for a long time. I don't even remember when they started publishing that stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
But nobody had really gathered it all up in a way to make it usable. And this was really a COVID thing for us. We had a little free time on our hands. A lot of people did. So
most of us just spent it fighting with our families. I think.
Right,
Cooped
exactly.
up in the house so long.
So we used that time to figure out how to get all those offering plans and pull all the information out of the Schedule A's, plus all the diagrams, floor plates and any other diagrams around the buildings. We wrote a little bit of software. We set up some human review of what's captured, and we gathered all that up for all the buildings that have been developed since the first condo, which was the Saint-Tropez in the mid-70s? 1960s.
60s, okay. Before I was born, that's why I don't remember.
Yeah, and so...
I mean, we were doing that for years with the Schedule A's.
Yeah.
Once you could get them, or we scanned them in, we had thousands of them here, and we manage a lot of properties between the two companies that we have. So I was so excited to lead a project of scanning all of those in with interns, just breaking the bindings. We had to get special
the printed,
machines.
You took the printed
we took the print because they weren't online.
Wow.
And we went through all this stuff, and then we would bring it in, and we would try to convert it to text so we could then, get a spreadsheet, upload that stuff. And we were doing that for years, but it, now that you're getting cleaner copies for free without having to go to send someone down to the AG's office.
No, and that was really hard back then because you didn't, you got the scan, but you couldn't really get the data.
We tried. We did okay.
Tough.
Depending on the quality of what we got, it could be. But with AI now, it's probably
super easy.
Simple.
Something comes out on the AG website, or we get our hands on an offering plan from somewhere. It just gets sucked right into the our software machine. and it pulls everything out of it, and then it spits it out on the other side.
I'm just picturing one of those like
Right.
Bugs Bunny conveyor
It's-
belts where the
yeah.
offering plans comes, goes in this machine,
Yeah.
and then it comes out.
Charlie Chaplin, right? It's it's just coming down the conveyor belt.
Or Lucille Ball with the
right.
chocolates trying to,
These are old metaphors. But then, it gets it like, call it 95% correct.
Right.
And then there's just a little bit of human review at the end of that to make sure we get it to 100%.
It's frustrating because when I was at Rebney in the 90s, I used to go down to Brooklyn and get the tax roll on
The courthouse? At the,
Joralemon Street,
Yeah.
and on old Epsidic tapes. We actually had to pay more to get those tapes converted to something we could use them in. But now you can get the tax roll online. They through open data, you have that. There's so much, the building permits, so much of what we do is just there. Acris, you can get monthly, although we get a daily feed of it. You can really get a lot of information, but the Attorney General's a little late to the party in doing some of this stuff. Plus, I don't check that often. If you go to the site, there's no way to know what's been recently posted unless you're kind of looking behind the scenes, I would assume.
You just got to you got to write a little bit of software that looks at the ID numbers.
Okay.
And then if there's a new ID number, it'll just grab that.
I'm surprised they haven't, and maybe they have, done a subscription service. Like Acris is ludicrously expensive.
Oh, to get the subscription for Acris is
Yeah,
very
well,
expensive.
you have to be a listing system to do that because then you can pass the course on to other people to get a daily feed. You can get it monthly for free, but what happens is people would just scrape information. I'm not saying that's what you do, but it's like, wouldn't it be better for you just to release all this stuff? It is public.
Well, the AG, this is going to get political. They're doing their best. The AG,
Well, they have a backlog.
They have a huge backlog. It's understaffed. They do a lot of things. This really, for them, falls under a kind of consumer protection
Right.
part of what they do. It's not really thought of as a real estate thing. And there are literally thousands of offering plans that are in binders, in warehouses, that they literally just can't get their hands on.
I could just imagine. We did this at Rebney years ago. We sent interns to the finance offices to go through the offering plans. This is, Acris was around, but it wasn't the same thing it is today. Because you go now get the declarations and for condos pretty easily. But there wasn't a way to get the whole universe of condos. So we went through their file. We gave them a copy of the file, too.
Right. So condo declaration's another document, and there's other documents that you can grab. Plus, you have all the transactions on Acris. And when you piece all these things together, you can get a pretty accurate view.
So what is that view as we're almost midway through the year? New development, when you look at it from a contract signed or closing standpoint, it's hard because things sign and close in blocks, right, in buildings. But when you look at the overall trend, what are you seeing?
We are bouncing around with 2017, 18, 19 volumes. We're kind of just back to where we were.
Which weren't great in anything.
It wasn't great, but we are where we were. So we had that little dip when the market really got shut down.
Right.
Then we had this huge run up. And then since then, it's just been on a gradual decline. We've gone kind of below the trend line periodically, but we're just, we're hovering below, above. It's kind of right where we used to be.
Yeah, for so many things we got to get back to pre-pandemic. And I said, we don't want that here because
Right.
18 and 19,
Soft.
the market were very slow because it had been a decade since we had a recession and there was no adjustment to housing prices.
Yeah.
Now, do you, with your special AI tools and everything, do you get any sense of where the buyers are coming from? I always tell people they're buying with LLCs. How can you know that? But I don't have AI on my side.
Well, we can look to see what % of the deals are LLCs.
Right, that's easy.
What numbers are corporate owners, and then how they're paying. Are they cash buyers? Are they getting mortgages? We can look to see where the addresses are and if they're local or not. We can look at the names.
Right.
There are various ways to look at them. But really, if you want to know where the buyers are coming, we really have two sides. Marketproof, we're looking at the supply, right? How much inventory is available? What are the transaction volumes? What's happening with prices? And we can talk about the prices in a second.
Sure.
On the buyer side, really, that information is coming from the brokers.
Yeah.
They know, where their buyers are coming from, and that information isn't really collected.
But I think there's a lot of misinformation about this. Like, for the longest time, it's like all these Russians are buying all these units and it's Chinese people. And if you talk to brokers now, they say the foreign buyers still aren't what they were. And a lot of people don't realize a lot of these new developments are being bought not just by U.S. residents, but by New Yorkers.
Yeah, and we got to segment it into Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens, which are really three separate markets. And then we got a segment by price point. But it's really, if we step back, it's the same cross-section of buyers that New York ever had.
Right.
You got people coming here for jobs who are wage earners and are high wage earners. You have kids whose parents are buying them a condo because they got a job here or they're going to school here. You got people who are retiring. You got all the life cycle events. That is what continues to drive the New York market.
Right, and we're not the boom-bust investment market that a Miami is or other parts of the city of the country that really see wild swings in activity.
It's as I said before, it's a relatively stable real estate market, and we should really think about that on a global scale, because especially if we're talking about Manhattan, because a lot of these buyers are buying not only in New York and not only in the U.S. but in other international cities.
Right. I had to do a lot of studying of international cities when we were fighting the pied-à-terre tax, a really bad idea that just won't go away.
That's it.
So you mentioned pricing. One of the things that was interesting in the resale side of the market was you have COVID, you shut down for 3 months till you can sell, and prices don't really move much. Then you reopen, and things are flying off the shelf. Prices really aren't going up because there's still a lot of inventory, and then things have slowed the last year pretty noticeably. And now prices, you said, are starting to drift lower. The condos, we've noticed that too.
Yes.
There's fewer of these the super luxury resales, although there are an impressive numbers on some of these sales and townhouse sales, very impressive numbers. But what are you seeing in terms of new development? And also, are developers changing? Because it used to be build as many large units as possible because that's what will sell.
Well, first of all, very little is getting built. And so the pipeline is really getting pretty dry. And over the next 2-3 years, it's got to get drier. But we have two separate things going on. One, the higher mortgage prices drive prices down because of affordability. But the lack of inventory drives prices up. Right?
Well, that's the rest of the country. Did you ever think you'd see a situation where mortgage rates would go from 3% to 7%, nationally, and pricing go up? Like
exactly.
That could never happen. They more than doubled. And you go, there's nothing to sell.
So that differential, one is driving down, one is driving up, but the lack of inventory is driving stuff up more than the higher mortgage prices is driving stuff down. Did I say that right? I think I did. Right?
Was anybody listening?
Did I get that right? It's so complicated. And for new developments, it's a little bit different because the seller is not a person. The seller is a company. They have a lot of stuff to sell. The way in which condo projects are underwritten, there's certain price points they gotta reach, in order to sell the unit.
And the lenders would like a certain amount of money.
That's it. Those units are the collateral for a big loan.
Right.
So it's a very different dynamic. And what we're seeing is that let's see if I can get this one right. The differential between new development condos and resale condos, like this past week, was like 50%. Right.
Differential in price.
Yeah, it's a huge price. And I'm talking about price per foot.
But isn't that like wonky to begin with? Because
it's a little wonky, but if we take it over a longer period of time, there's still a very large differential.
Well, people always want new. I mean, look at the difference between a new car and a used car, but there are perfectly good used cars out there for people. I know there's a big difference in the price. But I guess the problem too from a city standpoint is we're not building enough affordable housing. And now that we have this,
we keep going into the politics.
It's not politics.
Yeah, it's just reality.
No, but it's an undeniable fact. The rental vacancy rate, as of the last housing and vacancy survey, was 1.4%. The city has to have this done every 3 years, or you don't have rent stabilization. If that number ever got above 5%, they'd probably just change the law. But because they're never getting rid of rent stabilization. But the last time the rental vacancy rate was lower than 1.4% here in New York, the Jets won the Super Bowl.
Okay, so that was
68.
68.
Was 68 season, 69 Super Bowl. It's a problem. We don't know if for 45X, we had James Nelson on, we were talking about it. We had Vicky Mean on talking about it. Right now, it's all just talk until we see what happens. But
how it impacts deals.
How much do we
Can they
miss
get
421As?
We are all going to miss it for a long time. It's not coming back the way it was.
No.
The politics here is too complicated. This current, thing is a step in the right direction, but we got to see whether or not these deals pencil out.
Well, yeah, there has been a shift in the political climate here, and everything is in the control of one party, and that,
Let me give you another stat that doesn't get talked about that much.
Go.
Which is the percentage of residential housing in New York that's actually for sale. Right? So if you take every 100 houses, apartments, whatever, how many of them are for sale in New York City? And it's a very, very low number.
Right.
It's somewhere around just over 1%, 1.5% of all the residential properties in New York are for sale.
Huh?
So it's down quite substantially.
So how does that compare nationally? Do we have a number on that?
I think the national number is a little lower, but because of the density in New York, it's different. I don't know. I mean, I don't really understand how the national aspect of it works, but for New York City, I think what they do is they take the top 40 markets, urban markets,
right,
and then they average those out.
Okay.
But for New York City, we're at a pretty low number right now.
Well, it's funny. All you want to know the difference between New York City and the rest of the country, it's two simple. Well, one simple fact. On average, a little over 60% of Americans own a home, right? Or have a home with a mortgage on it, or homeowners. Here in New York City, about 70% of the residents are renters. So it's a complete opposite scenario. When I had my first job working for the federal government, we used to go to these conferences and people were talking about buying houses. I'm like, buying houses? You have any idea how little I make for New York? It's a completely different philosophy. And I live in Long Island. But it's still, there's some areas that just behave differently and are more high-cost areas. And where I live, we're known for our excessive property taxes, which luckily the city, although new developments, we didn't get into that much, but needless to say, they pay a lot in taxes, especially
Taxes
relative.
are high.
Co-ops are generally vastly undertaxed in most cases because of the crazy system here where they have to use rental comparables. And when you're comparing a 100-year-old building or something that old, the only comparables are old rental buildings that have a lot of rent-stabilized units that are leading to values for an entire building that are less than what one unit sells for.
Yeah, this is another complicated thing. Maybe we could explain to people how this thing works.
Well, we had Martha Stark on.
Yeah.
All
right. But let me circle back to the owned houses.
Right.
70% are rentals. And what amazes me about that, in New York, if we take the 5 boroughs, there's just over 1 million properties that are owned by somebody.
Right.
I think the number right now is at like 1.1 million. And in Manhattan, that number, I don't remember exactly what the number for Manhattan is, but what I can tell you is the pace at which that number moves moves very slowly. The growth in residential housing in Manhattan is less than 0.5% per year.
Well, I mean, because it's all new development condos, many of which are
smaller number of units.
Right, large.
There's very little movement. And if we look at other markets, and I talk about this a lot. If you go out to Phoenix or any of the cities that are really growing, there's whole neighborhoods that weren't there before, right? So
they have hedge funds building neighborhoods now, putting up single-family homes and renting them. It's like hedge funds will figure it out. They'll solve the problem for us.
So New York, not only is there no low inventory, but there's very little being built, and there's very little coming. So when we get to the prices, there's some pressure on the prices because of the mortgage rates, but the quantity of people selling their homes plus the number of homes coming onto the market is so low that we can expect relative price stability in residential housing in Manhattan.
And you think about it, that's a lot to ask for when you have rates that have climbed as much as they have. All right, so very quickly, the rest of the year, what are you thinking? Anything you want to predict? the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup. Or
Yeah.
do you have any sense of activity? Is there going to be any rebound in activity, whether new development or resale side of things?
I just see things as being very choppy.
Yeah.
And to me, really, the headline issue for New York is telling the story. We just have a vacuum of good storytelling about what New York is right now. And because of that, a lot of other places are grabbing the story about New York in order to kind of siphon people and money out of here and bring them to their markets. I've been spending a lot of time looking at the South Florida market, and that's certainly true of South Florida. I just listened to the mayor of Miami telling everyone in New York he loves them at the Real Deal Forum, which is amazing. I mean, he did a great job in kind of telling why Miami is an alternative to New York. And so, with that, New York doesn't have a clear story right now. Yes, we have quality of life issues. But more generally, kind of where we are in the cycle, economic cycle right now, their money is being invested across lots of markets. New York isn't, at this moment, the market. A lot of money that's here is looking for other places to go, which is driving up prices in those markets because obviously there's so much money here. But it's got to be, to your question, what's going to happen? It's got to be choppy because you got a lot of other places to spend money now.
Well, I think also that we don't expect a lot to change. Mortgage rates are not going to all of a sudden, go down to below 6% in 7 months. It's not likely to happen at all, regardless of what the Fed does. And anything the Fed does takes 6 months to a year to work anyway. We saw that when they started cutting rates, raising rates dramatically. It took a long time for inflation to come down. So I don't expect a lot to change.
Choppiness, right? Just more of the same.
Well, I think the problem, too, is that by nature, guys like you and me, people want weekly data. People want monthly data. That's very volatile, especially new developments. You can see a huge jump 1 week in activity. Next week, it goes down by the same percent. So it's very hard. We all want metrics. We all want analytics. But, in a really good quarter, maybe 3,000 apartments trade in Manhattan. That may sound like a lot, but then you start carving new development, resale, co-op, condo, elevator, walk up, doorman, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, we look at the neighborhood basis, we don't have enough sales for.
That's right.
And we tell people, leave it to the professionals. Allegedly, we'll let them know.
And 3,000. Do the math on how many dollars that is, and what kind of commission revenues that generates, what kind of legal fees that generates, right, and title fees it generates. It's still a lot of money.
Well, real estate is the engine that drives New York City's economy.
And taxes.
Property taxes are New York City's biggest source of non-federal aid revenue. It's the biggest source of tax revenue by far, and it's the most reliable source because it almost never goes down.
They notch it up every year. We can all grieve our taxes, right? But it's still
well, there
going
could
in
be
the same direction.
There could be some big changes coming between the Tenney lawsuit that Martha Stark is spearheading, and there's a tax reform commission of which Vicky Bean was a co-chair. There's a lot of problems with New York City's property tax. For something that generates so much money and is so reliable, it's a mess. It's very hard to understand. It's based on stuff that goes back over 40 years. Valuing co-ops and condos as if they were rental buildings is weird. It's hard to explain to people. Unfortunately, I've had to become an expert in it over the years, which is scary because I live in Nassau County. I don't know how those taxes work.
And it's contentious and broken. Right?
There are things in there that make no sense, and they just want to keep band-aiding it and band-aiding it.
Impossible to change.
It's not. Well, the problem is the state law has to change, and that's where the Tenney lawsuit may have more success.
That's Martha Stark's thing.
Yeah, she's the one spearheading it. They are looking at it from a court challenge thing where they could force the city to change certain rules rather than trying to get laws amended, which can take forever. All right, well, that's it. We could talk for days, and we'll certainly have you on again because you're always a lot of fun to talk to. So check out Marketproof. It is something that, we're all data hungry, and you have a really good understanding of this stuff. And
thank you so much.
And read his blog. It was that article was very interesting. It's a lot more in detail than we went over because we didn't have enough time. But if you really want to know how changes in mortgage rates affect co-ops and condos, and actually see some really cool charts. That it's always good to have charts. But that's it for the show. Thanks again to Kael Goodman for coming. Thanks to Rena and Ray. We're just gonna call you Rena, and then it's done with it. And thanks again to everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate the support, and have a great week.